Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, Jane, you were talking about, as a little girl, going to the temple office.
Correct. I'd love to go in the summertime, especially help Mother with her various chores, especially because it was air conditioned. And back in those days, in the early 40s, late 30s, there was only a few places you could get air conditioning, with going to a restaurant or to a movie. So this was a little added attraction, and we always spend the day with Mother, and of course we would always send out to Freedman's drugstore for pimento cheese sandwiches and chocolate malt. And so that part of my life has been so very part of Temple Emmanuel, you know.
And now there is a prayer book fund in her honor.
Yes, I want to be sure to include, when my mother passed away in 1959, the Board of Trustees wanted to memorialize her name for all the years of her devotion and service to the temple, and they came upon the thought of a prayer book fund to continue her name. If they need new prayer books, people would donate from various donations from time to time, their money to the prayer book fund. So her name is memorialized in the temple archives, and that's a wonderful way of remembrance for her.
Tell us about your father.
My father came from Liverpool, England. He was the son of a cantor in a synagogue in Liverpool. I never knew those grandparents because my father had come to America and became an American citizen.
And his name was?
My father's name was Julius Joseph Rutland. Our youngest son, Jordan, is named for my father, Julius, as is our oldest son, Alan, is named for my mother, Alan. They took the first name and the letters. My father did various things in his life. He was in World War I, and the very funny story is, I always say how we won World War I. My father was a gifted piano player and would entertain the family for hours and hours and hours in the days before television and computers. It was real family oriented in singing and all the wonderful times that I remember and people in our lives. But in World War I, the story goes, my father played the piano for Mary Pickford of the silent movie aboard a troop ship. So that's how that's how we won World War I. And my parents moved, Temple was building out here at Northwest Highway and Hillcrest until it was opened. We moved from my grandfather's big house across the street, and my mother was still, with the temple. My mother never drove. She got tangled up with a streetcar and what was at that time Forest Avenue. And the story goes that my husband's mother also got tangled up with the streetcar, and they said the streetcar had to back up and get untangled from her trying to drive, and she never drove again. And my mother would walk to the Boulevard Temple, which was just a couple of blocks away. On Monday morning, she always took the Sunday Funny paper to send to my grandmother's chauffeur then in the service, and in a rolled cardboard thing. I can still see her walking down South Boulevard with the container. She would often stop by Rabbi Lekowitz's house, maybe to drop off his sermon that she had typed up. She did the cemetery billing, all the billing, the temple bulletin, everything that had to be done was done by one person. Which
Tell us about how you grew up.
I was very fortunate child, very loved and doted upon, spoiled if you want to say, coddled. I grew up in a house of extremely old people. Back in those days, a lot of families lived together. My mother, father, and myself lived with my grandparents. They always had a great big house at 2527 South Boulevard, which is, as of today, 101 years old and still standing.
It has a designation from Dallas. Tell us about that.
Not that
It is. It's part of the South Boulevard Historic.
Oh, well, what Pauline is referring to, at the corner of Atlanta and South Boulevard, there is a stone marker which describes who had lived there long ago. It's about 99% Jewish families. So maybe that's what you are referring to.
It was an amazing house, and it's still in existence.
Yes, everyone, all my friends, and Pauline especially, loved to come over to my house because they thought it was a magical place.
It
and
was.
It really
Tell them
was.
how
It was
big it
4
was.
stories tall. A book had been written about, shown pictures called the architecture of the Southwest. It's been shown in a book too, and had 4 fireplaces, 4 stories, parquet floors in the front room, imported grass cloth on the walls in the dining room, 3 immense, gorgeous stained glass windows at the top of the landing, 4 bedrooms upstairs, 2 at the front with more fireplaces, attic with all the big trunks and all kinds of mysterious things up there, and the dreaded cellar, which the monstrous furnace that supplied the heat to the steam radiators at that time. And the furnace scared me to death. I would never go down in the basement. And one of the recent trips that our youngest son and myself took, he made me come down in the basement. We have a picture of myself with my arm around the furnace. So very often when we had a great big rainstorm, always the basement with blood, and we always had to get the fire department out to...
Tell them about the coach house in the back.
Oh, in the back was a 2-story house for the help, which was Luella and Amos, her trusted chauffeur. Luella lived upstairs, and I used to love to go up there and visit with her in the other world. And Amos lived downstairs with a room and a bath, and lived next door by the Buick. My grandparents always had a black Buick. I remember so wonderfully well Amos, and I still see him sitting outside the servant quarters, cranking out delicious peach ice cream, long ago days, which I've never tasted any peach ice cream to equal that. My grandmother was a very staid and proper grandmother. Everything had to be a ritual that never could vary. The taking down of the drapes in the summer, the putting down the rag rugs, slip covers covering all the immense pieces. Nothing ever changed. There is a scene very similar to that in the movie Driving Miss Daisy, where they're converting from winter to summer. Every Sunday dinner was the dessert with chocolate cake. Once in a while, wonderful caramel iced yellow cake, which I've never tasted any caramel like it at all, made lovingly by Llewellyn, a big black pan with the brown sugar and whatever. And so my Uncle John, who was the drama critic for the Galley Stew, and his wife Claire came to stay at the house one summer when my grandparents took what they called a motor trip. My uncle was a great tease, and the story goes he and Claire sent my grandparents, namely my grandmother, a wire on their trip, whatever that summer, and the wire said, the telegram, "We ate the Sunday cake on Saturday night." My poor grandmother was never the same. I mean, you didn't change anything, nothing. That was a funny, trick to them. And families used to live together. Like I say, they enclosed the upstairs porch for my brother when he came back from Antioch College, but I had often felt that, I don't think he ever lived in there, but families always lived together, grandparents, parents, children. That was kind of a norm.
And your aunt lived with you also.
Yeah, they had to live with us. We had a Llewellyn was a sort of carbon copy of Mammy from Gone with the Wind, quite heavy, and fabulous cook. One of her favorites was the chocolate roll cake, the chocolate cake made in a long sheet pan with the whipped cream and chocolate over it. And of course they didn't know about calories in those days, and I don't think it would have made any difference either, because that's just the way they ate. Rich cream sausage and rich desserts, and that's the way it was. My grandmother got her eggs and real butter every Saturday from Mr. Drum, who had a farm outside of Dallas. Of course, this was real butter, great big blocks of real butter. And it had a strange, funny story about one side of the house had a hole cut in the brick for the delivery of the ice back in the early days of refrigeration. My grandfather would not let the iceman come in the house until there was a little door cut from the outside to the inside where they just had to put the ice through the house into the interior. And so then I do have a picture of where they did finally put the brick, back together, and it was a little lighter brick than the rest of the house. I never had a real pet. Those things were just not allowed in the Rosenfield domain. I did have a duck and a rabbit, and that was about the extent of my pet.
And your auntie, what was she called? I thought it was charming.
My great aunt was also a Pauline. And we had to differentiate between my Aunt Pauline, and she became Pauline Darling. She would go away, she was my grandmother's sister. She would go away every summer to Europe or Banff or Lake Louise or up to New York. She would go to get away from the terrible Texas heat. And she often stayed at the Plaza Hotel. And all of her trips to Europe, she would bring me a different doll from the different countries. At one time I had 80 dolls. And every year at Christmas time, which we did always observe, and I always got an Easter basket too, this was the time of assimilation of the Jewish people, I think, into the mainstream of American life, in the associating with all manners of people and faith. It was a time of assimilation, but most of my friends that I all grew up with were Orthodox, and so that really maintained most of the neighbors on South Boulevard. Myron Goldberg and I were the only non-Orthodox family.
Orthodox or conservative?
Yeah, or Orthodox or conservative. I always think Orthodox. They all kept kosher, and we did not. So every Christmas morning I would wake everybody up at the crack of dawn, and Amos would come bounding up the stairs, and then my father you would be standing downstairs and you could hear a voice that said, "Has Sonny been a good girl this year?" And I said, "Yes." And then they took me over to one of the windows, and you would hear a clinking of like sleigh bells, and ho, 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 Merry Christmas to all, and they would take me to the other window and said, "There he goes, off again, Santa Claus." And to this day, I'll tell you, I never saw any Santa Claus or anybody, but I went along with the game. One Christmas, I got a Huffy bicycle, Christmas present. They kept it a surprise for me until we were downstairs for breakfast, and Dad asked if I would get a cigar for him, which he smoked quite a lot, from the library, and there was the bicycle. It was always too big for me, and on a clear day you could see the handlebars. And I was very spoiled with everything, and had a wonderful childhood. Friends that are still my friends today. We're all very close, and it was just a wonderful time. When World War II broke out, of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, I had never even heard of Pearl Harbor. My parents and myself were down at one of the movie houses downtown. There were no neighborhood theaters at that time. And we went to our favorite Rockefeller hamburger stand for burger, and that's where we heard the news. I still had kept all of our ration books for every member of the family, you know, for gasoline and shoes and things that we had to go along with, sugar and things. You know, I gave them all to our oldest son, Alec, and for his boy. All that I ever really knew of the war was collecting tin cans and newspapers in a little red wagon. And my father, we did have the drills, you know, the air raid drills. And my father was the air raid warden for our block. And I think we had to close the drapes very tightly like they did in England. And he would go out with the flashlight, and the flashlight was completely covered in a black paper with just a little tiny hole to help him walk along. He did not want much light to be shown, and I've often said we did not know any of the horrors and deprivation that was in England.
Go on.
And so, as you
Well, let's
say,
see, you were born in 1933,
correct.
and so the war broke out in 41.
Correct.
So you were only 8 years old.
Yes, I was only 8 years old. I had never heard
Right.
of Pearl Harbor. When they mentioned it, I thought maybe it was a harbor full of pearls.
Yes, yes.
I had no recollection of knowledge of anything of that
Yes.
nature.
Yes.
Later years, when my Aunt Selma, who was my mother's dearest friend, took me to my first trip to Europe, I went to the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam, and of course, being Jewish, it really does something to you. I remember coming out and saying, "I want to go home and pay my income tax." You were so touched, and
Yes.
it really gets to you when
Yes,
you know
indeed.
what they went through and the eventual capture of them.
So tell us, where did you go to high school and college? And
I went to our neighboring Forest Avenue High School, and at that time Forest Avenue. It is now called James Madison. It is African American high school, when the whole neighborhood changed to African Americans after World War II. Everyone I had ever grown up with, we all graduated together. Most of my friends went on to the University of Texas. Myron Goldberg and I went to SMU, just coming back and forth every day. And I think in that respect, I look back now, you don't have the same college rah-rah feeling that you do if you were living at a college away from home.
And making the new friends and so
Yeah,
on.
making new friends, or maybe joining a sorority as it was. We had one Jewish sorority at SMU, and there were just a few Jewish girls that I think we would meet from time to time, Phi Sigma Sigma, and of course it's all international sorority, but it's now gone.
So you finished college.
I finished college, and I went to work for A. Harrison Company. Primarily, I loved retailing, primarily as assistant buyer for a very lovely lady who gave me my peignoir set for an engagement gift. She had several departments in what at that time they had a basement in A. Harrison Company. She always bought nice, good quality things. I did a lot of ordering for her. We got along beautifully. She asked especially for me. And I also worked in assistant buyer in the cosmetic department, which was a lot of fun, getting samples of all the beautiful things. And but I never got to go to New York to buy. But then in the meantime, most wonderful man in the world came into my life.
Who was also a native Dallasite.
Yes, and my husband was Gale Lewis Ray. The first name is for his grandfather, Gabriel Lewis Rachofsky, Rachofsky. Some of the family did shorten the name, and some did not, but that's the original name. He grew up in, originally they lived on Forest Avenue, and Gail's father built a house in University Park on Hanover and Thackeray. All the cousins always lived next door to each other and followed each other from place to place. And he had a cousin, Gerald Ray, who was also named for the grandfather. And though Gail and I went to different high schools, it became the norm, or the, whatever you want to call it, that when we became 16, a lot of the girls would give the Sweet 16 dances, and usually every Saturday night, and each party had a different theme, and it was a melting pot for all the high school kids from Forest and Woodrow Wilson, Highland Park, maybe. And so that went on a long time until we all grew out being 16. And the ritual was after the dance, we'd all go to Sammy's on Greenville for another hamburger and a real Coca-Cola. In the later years, we outgrew Sammy's and went to a little more sophisticated grown-up place on Oak Lawn, which I have now forgotten the name. I have a menu from one New Year's Eve as we were growing up at Town and Country, which was a very lovely restaurant here in Dallas, of the very few there were at the time. And this was New Year's Eve, probably in the 50s. And the menu said for New Year's Eve dinner was $5. And that is such a shock. You couldn't even walk into a place for $5 anymore.
I remember the Sweet 16 dances, you would get an invitation and it would say, your date is.
Correct. We were always paired with, and I remember one time your date was Ralph Rosenbaum. And you said, I remember that, and you said, I'm going to have a good time. And I thought, that's Pauline. And very positive and forward thinking, and that, so,
I always thought my first date was Larry Goldman somehow.
you know, remember, and we that's how everybody got to know everybody.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it is that Gail and I became very close. He had gone with Amy Lieberman for a long time, and I had gone with Davy Stillman, who was valedictorian of our class in Forest.
Now, Gail was a twin.
Yes, Gail was a twin who had a twin sister in San Antonio, married to a doctor in San Antonio, Gloria Milton Ray. Fortunately, Gail got the height, and she got what they said at the time, the leftovers. She was, Gail's mother thought she had died before they could bring her in to see her. And her skin was so thin you could see the veins running through her skin. She also contracted later years Alzheimer's, which my husband also contracted. They had an older sister who just passed away this past October, 10 years their senior, who was Orlean Ray, and she married my brother-in-law, George Ross. And it was so strange that we started going together, and when my mother was quite ill and actually dying at Baylor Hospital, he was with me all night long. We were not even engaged. And then I went to visit a friend in California. When I came back, he was there at the airport to meet me at what then was only Love Field. And I said, I guess I just had to marry him. I couldn't get rid of him. And so we became very, very close, and we had the understanding that we would get married, but in those days, we felt that we should wait until a year after my mother passed away. And what was so funny, my sister-in-law, the other sister-in-law, Claire Rosenberg, just knew I was going to get an engagement ring on Valentine's Day before, when we really got engaged. And so she was all excited and just knew it was going to happen. But in reality, I got fold-up house shoes. I don't know who was more crushed, Claire or myself. So we got engaged on my birthday, December 1959. Well, by this time, I started giving up all hope. And after the fold-up house shoes event, so Gail came over in the evening, and we were just, I'm sure, going out for dinner, and we went out in the back step with my mother and father's house on Graivier they bought when the temple moved to the new location in 1957. And Gail said, did you get your birthday present? I said, no, I'm not even expecting after all this time, stress and disappointment that we would get engaged ever. And he said, well, here it is. That's it. He put the ring on my finger,
Yeah.
and that was it. And we had 47 wonderful years together, 2 darling, wonderful sons, especially Alan, who emulates Gail to a T. I've had some cousins refer to him as Gail Jr. He is so his father in every way. And Jordan is just the other way around. Fun, loving, funny, happy-go-lucky. Alan's very serious, and, you know, the older son is usually the more serious type. I've had people ask me, how are your wonderful sons? How are your wonderful sons? I said, well, I guess they're fine, and that's evidently the impression they have made on so many people.
They are extremely, extremely attentive. Tell us about how you keep up your cemetery plots.
We are big cemetery goers, mostly Gail's family. We are there for every occasion, Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthdays, anniversaries, with containers of fresh flowers all the time. Alec, and we also go over to the Rosenfield plot. Alec took it upon himself and his 3 sons to redo the cemetery Rosenfield plot with new soil, new flowers, new bushes. And so I think maybe he had gained a reputation of cemetery work, so he's now on the cemetery committee at Sheriff Israel.
Would you finish up by just telling us a little bit about your Uncle John?
My Uncle John Rosenfield was the drama critic of the Dallas Morning News for many, many years. He was called the Czar of the Southwest. My grandfather always said he sent him to Columbia University, but my uncle went to the opera instead, stand up in the peanut gallery to make every opera. He was married to Claire Berger of New York City. The story goes they eloped, might call it, and to marry, and the story goes she only left with 28 pairs of silk stockings. He was, they knew all the movie stars, the people in the music, the theater world, and I have been told that today we are blessed with opera, ballet, symphony theater because of my uncle's very deliberate push for culture in Dallas. Originally, Dallas was just like a one-horse town with a standing sidewalk, and it was him that really pushed it. He had entree, of course, to the money people in Dallas, with R.L. Thornton, for which we have a freeway named for him, Fred Florence, president of the Republic Bank, my great uncle Arthur Kramer, who bankrolled things. We used to have the Metropolitan Opera came in the spring every year. We now have our own Dallas Opera. Gail and I would love to get dressed up and go to the opera. For everything, we were given free passes to everything. I've never had to pay for anything in my life. Of course, I could go now, but everything's, it's a different world. And my uncle would always have to leave after the first act of the opera to write up his review, which was then published the next day. They don't do that anymore. We always knew where Uncle John and Aunt Claire sat. They would leave after the first act, and we moved over to their seats, just a little closer down.
Books have been written about him.
There's a wonderful book called John Rosenfield's Dallas, written by a former professor at SMU. Did I give you a book, or did you buy it?
Yes, I have it.
I have it. And we worked several times with the author, trying to give him an insight to my uncle's life, and their life was not a 9-to-5 type life. They were going to something every night virtually, and he would go down to the news again about 10, then about noon it was time to go to lunch and gather up a big crowd, and then go to some sky cafe there.
Well, it was a wonderful life that they led.
It was a wonderful life that they led, and they had an unusual house in later years on University Boulevard with cat back, like where a garage would sit. They had tall shrubs at the street level. You couldn't see the house. And they entertained the who's who and the people in the theatrical and musical world. He had a closet filled with valuable records, which later my aunt gave to SMU, and was climate controlled for these records. They had many real Carusos and oh yeah, the real thing. And he would listen to a symphony or something maybe before a performance to kind of gauge the two. My uncle died in his sleep, taking a nap in 1966, and my Aunt Claire died a few years later. They had a son, John Rosenfield III, who became professor of ancient art at Harvard University for many years. It's a very strange story about how he started his career. He was in the OSS in World War II. That was before the CIA. He was trained in all aspects of the Japanese culture, the language, everything Japanese at University of California, Berkeley. And he was then dropped from airplanes into Burma and China and India, to spy on the Japanese. From that, he acquired his career with a long string of degrees, mile long, Phi Beta Kappa. He became a PhD, and finally his parents said, "John, quit going to school and start supporting your wife." So, which he did for many years. And in turn, as the world turned, the Empire of Japan honored him with many different medals, this, that, and the other. Notably, the nicest one was a personal gift of $25,000 for his contribution to Asian art. The last honor was the Charles Lang Freer Award for his contribution to ancient art, and he had to go back to Japan to get the medal or award, and he sent me a copy of his acceptance speech. Of course, always starting off in something fun, and he starts by saying, as a only recipient from the state of Texas, all he could ever draw were jackrabbits and cowboys. And so that's how he started his...
And he ended up as head of the Oriental Art Department.
Yes, he was head. It was a certain chair that was given that he headed. And
at Harvard, was it?
At Harvard, yes, at Harvard. And he died for a long time, unbeknownst to me, of a stroke. 2 years ago in December, had a stroke, and I think they didn't know I was alive, and I kept calling him, and then I called the place where they lived, and then they transferred me to the hospital and told me Dr. Rosenfield died of a stroke.
Well, you have had the most amazing life and a wonderful, wonderful record of what early Jewish Reform life was like.
It was.
And truly involved in Temple Emmanuel. Thank you so much. This is only the tip of the iceberg, but thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay, tell who that is.
Who is
Jane.
this?
that's my Uncle John Rosenfield of the Dallas Morning News.
Okay.
It's the same, that's a little better picture.
Show the next one, Jane.
Okay. This is a caricature of something of my uncle, which I told Pauline really looked more like him than he was quite heavy, quite the whole family was. And this was my grandmother at the time with her then 4 grandsons. They're all males, mostly in the Rosenfield family. I'm the only child in my granddaughter in my generation. My mother was the only daughter in her
Wow.
generation. This is associated with my uncle. This was Untitled Chapter, who was conductor of the Dallas Symphony. My uncle. This was Gordon Roop. I think he started the head of something with either the theater or the opera. I'm
think
not
maybe the
sure. One of
opera.
the, I think opera, and I don't know who that man
That
was.
looks like LBJ.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not.
Not tall enough.
No.
Okay, this is Pauline. I should bring this guest book of my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary at their home
Oh, wow.
on South Boulevard in 1935.
Wow.
Okay, and it has Jenny and Matt or Rosenfield. These were pioneer Dallas people who came to the house. Their old Dallas names, Pauline's parents are listed here too. Regina Pierce and Lee Pierce, their signatures are right there.
Show the picture of the table.
Oh,
Okay.
sure.
This, of course, was a very elaborate, they used to write up all these things in the paper. This is my grandparents on their honeymoon, and here they are at the 50th wedding anniversary. Evidently, there was an opera company performing here in Dallas, and they said that my Uncle John brought a lot of the opera stars over to the house afterwards.
How
I was
fun.
only 2 at the time, and I could not come down to the big evening soiree. And I remember looking over the banisters. I should have had the pictures of the house, too. And my first words were, more cake. I'm still saying more cake. There's a picture of the elaborate.
How beautiful.
And this is described in the write-up and what the women had on. And this was in the dining room of their home on South Boulevard. The house was still standing at 101 years old.
Wow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
You are
much.
very
That's
wonderful.
fabulous.
That went on something, I don't know what.
Probably on the cake or the decoration.